A man reclines in a leather armchair. His head rests on his hand. His eyes are open, turned up and away from the camera. His other hand hangs over the arm of the chair. It circulates with a caption that tells you what you are seeing. Notice the way the photographer has positioned the man's arm in order to support the head? Because the man in the chair, the caption explains, is dead. It sounds plausible. And one part of it is true. Genuine post-mortem photographs do survive. Families really did photograph their dead. This film will show you the real thing. A quiet bedside portrait. A child among flowers. A funeral group gathered at a coffin. Made with care and kept. But around that one truth, the internet has built a library of false ones. Portraits of living people, recaptioned as corpses. Studio tools, recaptioned as corpse machinery. Collectors have debunked these mislabeled portraits, case by case. 40 of them in one survey alone. The man in the chair is Lewis Carroll. He wrote Alice in Wonderland. The archives date this sitting to 1863. He lived some 35 years more. This is the story of what these photographs actually were. The techniques the captions point to were real. Painted pupils, hidden mothers, iron stands. Each one real, and each one misread. The reasons families made these pictures are better than the myth. And by the end, you'll read this photograph yourself. To read them properly, you have to start where they start. Not with a camera, with a death in a family. On the 8th of February, 1867, a little girl named Ada Brown died at home. She was 2 years old. The cause on the certificate reads bronchitis, convulsions. We know her because that certificate survives, and because of one more thing her family did. A published record preserves and describes one photograph of her. We will come back to that record, because you cannot understand that photograph, or any of them, without understanding the world it was made in. In 1881, across more than 2,000 registration subdistricts of England and Wales, infant deaths averaged around 127 for every 1,000 births. An average across local areas, not one national figure. And beneath it, the map was unequal. London, the mining towns, and the textile towns ran higher still. The killers had names. The National Archives counts 4 cholera epidemics in Britain between 1832 and 1866. In one Soho outbreak in 1854, its records give 616 dead within a single month. Historians calculate that in the middle decades of the century, scarlet fever alone accounted for roughly 1 child death in 7 among 1 to 4-year-olds in England and Wales. And at the century's dawn, tuberculosis was killing at least 1 person in 7 in England. The documented cases died at home, and the culture around them prized what historians call a good death. Family near, time to say goodbye. In that ideal, dying was a household event. Behind one lit window, a family would be keeping exactly that kind of watch. And when death came, mourning had a public uniform. Widows wore crepe, a dull black fabric made to swallow light. The etiquette, most of it surviving through late-century American manuals, was exact on paper. A widow, at least a year in deepest black. For a child, about a year. An ideal on both sides of the Atlantic, never a law. How closely anyone complied depended on money, class, place, and faith. The poor died and layered what they owned, and grieved no less. Mourning was also worn closer than cloth. Jewelry of jet, fossil wood turned to gleaming black. Some of the finest British jet came from the Whitby coast in Yorkshire. And jewelry of hair, worn in mourning, and not only in mourning. Hair could stand for any bond. A brooch holding a woven panel of it behind glass. A bracelet netted from human hair, its clasp painted with a single flower. Hair outlasts a body. That was the point. Under that grammar sat a plainer fear, that a face could be lost. Many children who died had never once been photographed. In houses without portraits, there was only memory, and memory dies too. The museums that keep these objects read them plainly. Not a society obsessed with dying, but families using a shared material language to make grief visible. And one way to fight the erasure itself had just been invented. In 1839, the daguerreotype arrived, a photograph made on a polished silver plate. For the first time, an exact likeness no longer required an artist or an artist's prices. It rapidly displaced the painted miniature, and it slid into the same tender places miniatures had lived. The locket, the case, the pocket. A likeness you could close your hand around. Here is the new trade at work. A daguerreotypist steadying an open display case, 9 small portraits in its raised lid. In the American trade of the early 1850s, reported prices ran from 25 cents for the smallest plate, through 50 cents at the cheap picture factories, to about $2 at a fashionable Broadway studio. Approximations from surviving records, not a fixed tariff. Cheap portraits traveled too. Itinerant operators, generally serving a poorer clientele, worked from wagons, rented rooms, and public squares. Now consider what a portrait had cost before. One American price list, the painter Thomas Sully's from 1837, ran from $150 for a smaller portrait to $1,000 for a full length. The comparison is imperfect across dates and formats, but it explains what happened next. A permanent face had moved within ordinary reach. And the faces it kept were not only the wealthy's. Plate by plate, format by format, the new photography kept widening who could afford a permanent likeness. Frederick Douglass sat for this one. Sitting for a portrait cost time as well as money. In the early 1840s, a daguerreotype exposure commonly ran about 30 seconds to a minute, depending on the light. Stillness was the price of sharpness, and studios kept tools to help living sitters pay it. Remember that. Britain kept thinner records of the death work itself. Its photographers were quieter about it than the Americans, but the service was on offer. Historians of the trade note such house visits cost more. Travel time and the hard character of the work both raised the fee. A Bristol directory of the 1850s and 60s put it this way: portraits of invalids may be taken at their own residences, also correct likenesses of persons deceased. From the 1870s, the few who advertised the work at all often retreated into euphemism. portraits of invalid persons at their own residences. One firm had already put the whole trade into a rhymed couplet in 1859. Of those for whom we fond emotions cherish, secure the shadow ere the substance perish. The shadow was the photograph. The substance was the person. Now, the tool you were asked to remember. Its paper trail survives. Here is one, drawn for the United States Patent Office in 1876. An iron stand on a floor pole used to steady a sitter. A posing stand. Look at it. A tripod base, a thin adjustable column, a small fork for the back of the head. It is furniture in the family of a music stand. Period records describe stands like it as head and body rests, bought by studios for one reason: slow plates. Photo historians point out why. A living body sways, a living head nods, and a long exposure records the sway as blur. Collectors who have examined those records add that such stands were not built to bear a body's weight. Later, you will see how viral captions reverse that evidence. First, the work itself. Somewhere in this trade was the photographer, name unrecorded, who made Ada Brown's picture. Here is what happened when such a message came to a photographer's door. The order normally came without warning, and it could not wait. Trade advice said allow no more than 24 hours. The face, one practitioner warned, changed within a day or two. The documented cases show the real range. In one recorded case from 1872, a man arranged photographs of his brother within 4 hours of the death. When the poet Matthew Arnold's infant son died in January 1868, the photographer came on the second morning, and the paper trail ran deep. When Maud Binns, a grocer's daughter, died of pneumonia in 1888, her portrait could be matched to her death certificate. How Ada Brown's own sitting went, no record survives. But the trade press tells us what such a visit was like. Walk it once, with no name attached. The photographer in what follows is a composite, drawn from the trade's own accounts, not a person. This is the wet plate era. Wet collodion. Glass that has to be coated, exposed, and developed while still damp. One account describes sensitizing 2 plates before setting out, wrapping them in damp blotting paper to keep them alive, and walking 15 minutes through town to the house. At the house, the work was domestic. British accounts place the photographer in the family's own rooms, not a studio. An American manual describes turning a cellar or basement into a temporary darkroom. The deceased is often found in bed. Then the hardest, gentlest logistics in the trade. The bed, or the body, or both, are moved toward the window because the plate needs daylight. The photographer often asked the relatives to leave the room first, unless the family had said, "Do not disturb her." Then he worked with what he had, and some accounts show him restrained by exactly that instruction. In this daguerreotype, a man sits in silhouette at a curtained bedside. An American manual from 1877 gives the trade's plainest surviving instruction. Place the body on a lounge or sofa, raise it to a sitting position, and bolster firmly. Support on a sofa, firmly bolstered, not a corpse standing free on its feet. Even that manual's briskness was American. The British accounts are more reticent, more careful of the family. And then, the room does the one thing the plate requires of it. Nothing. The exposure begins. The house holds its breath. What families asked of these pictures settled into conventions. Museum historians describe the dominant one as the last sleep. Eyes closed, everything arranged to say rest, not decay. Reclined in a chair, like this girl with her tinted cheeks. Or laid on a pillow, hands folded, like this child. Some families chose the harder, honester image, the coffin itself. Here, an infant's open casket stands banked in roses, framed pictures on the wall behind it. And some stepped into the frame themselves. A family gathered at the casket, so the photograph recorded the living beside the dead. That is what posed with their dead actually meant. Which returns us to Ada Brown. What survives of her is a carte de visite, a photograph the size of a playing card, pasted on stiff card. The record describes her lying across the lap of a woman believed to be her mother, eyes closed, arms crossed, the pose she would take in her coffin. That card is not ours to show you. The photograph now on screen is a different Canadian post-mortem portrait from Richmond Hill, made between 1860 and 1900. An older sitter, laid out alone, his head on a lace-covered pillow. Margaret Brown registered her daughter's death. She was present when Ada died. Whether she is also the woman holding her, the record suggests but cannot prove. And honest history stops exactly there. That restraint is exactly what the viral captions lack. The card was made, and the card was kept, and keeping had its own furniture. The daguerreotypes you saw earlier lived in hinged cases, made to be opened and closed like a prayer book, carried in a pocket, set where the household could see it. Or it joined the family's visual history outright. Look at where this girl lies, beneath a wall crowded with framed portraits. Albums and mantelpieces put the dead beside the living, where visitors could see them. This photograph is the whole custom in one frame. The same instinct ran straight to the throne. Prince Albert died in December 1861. Victoria wore black for the rest of her life. A photograph was taken of Albert on his deathbed. A colored copy is said to have hung over his side of the bed in her residences. Her grief was exceptional in scale. It was not exceptional in kind. The custom lasted to the century's end. In 1898, Sir William Jenner, once physician to Victoria herself, was photographed in his own bed in the last sleep pose. The museum that keeps that photograph suggests a relative may have taken it, because by the 1890s, a family could own a camera. Hold that thought. From the daguerreotype's arrival to the century's end, this was what the pictures were. The last likeness, made inside the family, for the family. Strip that reading away, and the same pictures turn into something else entirely, which is exactly what happened. Now you know what the real pictures were. So let's go back to the one you met first and learn to read it. 6 tests drawn from the collector's debunking work. We will take each test from the records, then apply all 6 to the man in the armchair. Test 1. The standing corpse. the claim that Victorians strapped their dead upright to a hidden iron stand. This modern photograph, uploaded in 2009, uploader identified, not an archive accession, shows the kind of object the story means. The patents, adverts, and period illustrations collectors have examined describe a device for steadying the living. None of them describes a post-mortem use, and the stands were not built to bear a body's weight. Test 2 is just mechanics, as the debunking literature explains. A body in rigor, the stiffness that sets in after death, cannot be arranged against a stand, and a body out of rigor cannot hold itself up. Look at what the patents protect: adjusting screws, a padded chair, a small rest for the back of a head. Test 3 writes itself, in the patent's own words. This one, from 1894, states its purpose: to support, quote, against movement, the head and body of an infant, small child, or grown person, so as to ensure a perfect picture and obviate any blurring thereof. Movement, blurring, a sitter who can move. In the viral captions, a stand in the frame is proof of death. In the paper trail, it is evidence of a living sitter. Test 4. The hidden mother. You will see portraits where a draped, faceless figure holds a child. The viral reading says someone propping up a corpse. Hidden mother photographs normally show living children being held still. The debunking literature calls the corpse support reading a modern confusion. Look at this one. An infant on the lap of a figure draped head and shoulders in black cloth. Below the drape, a light ruffled skirt, and both shoes are plainly visible. Under drapes like this one is, normally, a parent holding a living child still through a long exposure. The myth reads that parent as corpse machinery. The record reads the opposite. Test 5. The blur rule. The claim that the blurry people are alive and the sharp one is dead. Collectors point out sharpness only tells you about movement and exposure. It is not a death certificate. Here is a genuinely ambiguous case. A woman standing alert, a boy slumped in a chair, and the honest answer is, the photograph alone cannot tell you. Test 6. The eyes. Retouchers really did paint pupils onto some prints, and early photographic chemistry could turn light blue eyes ghost pale on its own. Retouching meant painting directly onto the finished print. This girl's cheeks were tinted by hand. But strange eyes alone prove nothing. Identification takes provenance: an archive, a caption, a family record, a coffin in the frame. This is not only social media's mistake. Even a 2016 BBC News feature captioned a family photograph as showing a dead child propped against a stand, and asserted that the dead were often the sharpest figures in the frame. Both statements are contradicted by the collector and photo historian research. The myth lives in respectable places. Now, apply the tests. One collector's survey re-examines 40 viral post-mortem photographs, case by case, and documents living sitters. Start where this film began. The girl said to be propped up with a special device? Look down. There is no device. The floor beside her boots is empty. The child on the draped lap. The caption says someone held her in place. And there it is, right. This is the hidden mother arrangement, which normally means a living child, held still. What the caption adds, death, the photograph does not establish. And this photograph the listicle used twice, for painted pupils and for the sharp child among blurred parents. 2 diagnoses, 1 picture. Test by test. the library of horrors turns back into a family album. And now, the armchair. Test by test. No stand in sight, and nothing standing. No drape. Sharpness that proves only stillness. Eyes that on their own prove nothing. An arm that is not a support rig, but a resting pose. And the test that settles it. Provenance. Not a death record, but an author. Recaptioned a century and a half later. The caption asked you to see a corpse. The archive shows you an author at rest. Which leaves the real question. If these pictures were ordinary love, why did families ever stop making them? In 1888, a Rochester company sold a small box camera. Its historians record the price as $25, loaded with film for 100 pictures. The slogan was, "You press the button, we do the rest." And it was true. You mailed the camera back and prints came home. Though the same advertisement adds, in smaller type, or you can do it yourself. Within a decade, a trade journal reckoned more than 1.5 million roll film cameras had reached amateur hands. In 1900 came the Brownie, $1 for the cheapest, and histories of the company say it was marketed primarily at children. A 1904 Christmas advertisement lists brownies at $1, $2, and $5. Its signed illustration shows a woman using a folding camera beside a child in bed. Histories of the snapshot say where those pictures went. Into family albums, filled with the living. Birthdays, holidays, children squinting into the sun. Here, 3 children each hold a box camera, while a man guides the middle child's hands. And in one Kodak advertisement, a line written along the foot of the negative itself. Betty's 5th birthday. And the date. Photography's deathbed rationale, one last chance at a face, weakened with every album page. Because now there were faces everywhere. The advent of the snapshot has been called the death knell of the art. But no single invention killed the custom. Several forces converged. The second force, death changed address. In the United States, by 1949, nearly half of deaths happened in institutions. By 1980, nearly 3/4. Those are 20th century American figures, but the direction was set earlier, as undertaking professionalized on both sides of the Atlantic. American associations from the 1880s, British bodies in 1898, 1905, and for embalmers, 1927. Increasingly, the body left the parlor, and kind, trained strangers prepared it. So the camera did not abandon death. It stepped back from it. Scholars date the steep decline of the deceased-centered portrait to roughly 1880 through 1910, with a sharp fall after 1930. And what grew in its place is visible here: a flower-heaped wheeled bier and a crowd filling an English high street. Increasingly, the mourning, not the dead. The old form persisted at the edges. The archives keep open casket funerals and coffin portraits from the 1920s and 30s, and it persisted where the standard story rarely looks. In Harlem, in 1929, the portrait photographer James Van Der Zee was still composing funeral photographs of great formal beauty. The practice was never only Victorian, and never only one people's. By the middle of the 20th century, the last likeness photograph had grown far less common in family life, transformed more than extinguished. But the instinct never died. In 2005, in Colorado, an organization was founded whose name echoes a child's bedtime prayer. Now I lay me down to sleep. It recruits, trains, and mobilizes volunteer photographers to make remembrance portraits, free of charge, for parents whose baby has died. Its own statements call the portraits remembrance, not medical documentation. Remembrance. It has given families more than 80,000 portrait sessions. It counts sessions, not families. And this film will not invent a number it does not publish. In the United Kingdom, this is now written into bereavement care itself. The National Pathways 2022 guidance says all bereaved parents should be offered the chance to make memories. Photographs are named among them, alongside seeing and holding their baby. Read how carefully the modern rules are drawn. Ask, do not assume. Offer informed choices, never pressure. Respect a decision once made, and explain that parents may change their minds. The same pathway asks hospitals to train the staff who meet bereaved parents. A scholarly discussion draws the connection explicitly. Contemporary infant loss photography and the Victorian Post-Mortem portrait share one purpose: making memory material when a life has been painfully short. It is not a revival, and the differences matter. Hospital care, informed consent, a free volunteer service. And still, across 159 years, from a home in 1867 to a hospital room in 2026, the line is straight and human. When a face is about to be lost, someone reaches for a camera.
The pictures the Victorians made were not morbid theater. The pictures made this year in quiet hospital rooms are not either. Both are what a camera is for when the chance to use it is running out. Which brings us back, one last time, to the man in the armchair.
You know how to read this photograph now. The arm, a resting pose, not a support rig. The stillness, an exposure, not a diagnosis. The caption, a story the archive does not support. And beside it, the same man, alive, in an archive that names him. And you know how to read the real ones. This child lies beneath a wall crowded with framed portraits, laid with care among pictures kept in view. Homes kept such photographs where they could be seen, and albums where they could be turned, objects for repeated looking. And a face like this one, serene, formal, flowers at his shoulder, was kept because someone meant to look at it again. Put away the word creepy. It was never the right word. The record we have, the museums, the trade papers, the surviving cards, shows families using the newest image technology they had to preserve a relationship the moment death threatened to erase it. A family with one chance left to keep a face took it. That is what these pictures were for. That is what love looked like.